I knew from the moment Karen Hamilton moved in that life, as I knew it was about to take a turn, for the worse. Some people bring a warm plate of cookies when they move into a neighborhood. Karen, she brought not only me, but the whole neighborhood to horror and endangered the lives of people in ways no one could have predicted. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. The first time I crossed paths with her, I was just getting home from work, exhausted, dragging myself out of my car, my old but reliable '97 Mustang. It wasn't a showpiece, sure, but it ran like a dream, and I wasn't about to let anyone tell me otherwise. "Excuse me!" I turned around, and there she was, standing on the sidewalk in her pristine beige pantsuit, arms crossed like she'd already taken me to court in her mind and won. "Yes?" I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sniffed, eyeing my car like it had personally offended her. "That vehicle, it's an eyesore. It doesn't belong out in the open." I let out a slow breath. "It's my car, and it's parked in my driveway, legally." Karen's lips twitched into a forced smile, the kind that said she wasn't here to be reasoned with. "Yes, but it's unsightly. It doesn't exactly fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood." I glanced around. A couple of luxury SUVs, a Tesla, maybe a Mercedes down the street. I guess my Mustang wasn't up to her HOA-approved standards. Too bad. "I have another car in the garage," I said, shrugging. "This one stays here. I'm not moving it." Her fake smile tightened into a thin line. "You could park it elsewhere." "Where exactly?" She hesitated. "Well, I'm sure you could find a solution. Maybe at a friend's house or—" "Not happening." Her eyes flashed, but she caught herself. "Oh, we'll see about that." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked off, the click of her heels echoing in the quiet suburban evening. I had a bad feeling about this. I was right. That bad feeling. It didn't take long to prove itself right. 2 days later, I found a notice taped to my front door. A violation warning. I ripped it off and scanned the bold print. Notice of violation improper vehicle parking. You are in violation of the HOA guidelines regarding vehicle aesthetics and placement. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines. Please move the vehicle to an appropriate location within 48 hours. I exhaled sharply and crumpled the paper in my fist. So this was how she wanted to play it. I walked back to my driveway, staring at my Mustang. Same spot, same car. Nothing had changed. But now, apparently, it was a violation. My neighbor, old Mr. Gallagher, was watering his lawn and chuckled when he saw my expression. "Karen got to you already?" "Yeah," I muttered, holding up the notice. He shook his head. "She's been sniffing around all week, looking for things to find people for. My mailbox was 2 inches too tall, apparently." I groaned. I knew she'd be a problem. And a problem she was. The next day I found another notice, a $50 fine. I ignored it. 2 days later, another fine, $100 this time. And then came the real insult, a letter claiming that my car was decreasing property values and that if I didn't move it, the fines would continue to double. I stormed over to Karen's house. She answered the door with a saccharine smile. "Oh, hello, how can I help you?" "You can stop harassing me with bogus fines," I snapped, shoving the latest notice in her face. Her smile didn't waver. "I don't harass, I enforce rules." "What rule says I can't park my own car in my own driveway?" She tilted her head. "The rules are open to interpretation." I let out a short laugh. "No, they're not, and I'm not paying a cent." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, you will. And if you refuse, well," she sighed dramatically, "things might get complicated for you." I clenched my jaw. "Is that a threat?" She placed a hand over her heart. "Oh, of course not. Just a neighborly warning." I turned on my heel and walked away. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. It was late in the afternoon when I pulled up to my driveway, expecting the usual calm of suburban life. Instead, what I saw twisted my gut. The familiar shape of my Mustang was gone. In its place, an empty patch of concrete, but that wasn't the worst part. A tow truck was slowly backing out of my driveway, the back of it holding my car like a prize to be claimed. My heart raced as I stomped out of the car, eyes locked on the vehicle being lifted away. I clenched my fists as the tow truck rolled further down the street, my car dangling behind it like some helpless animal being dragged off to slaughter. Without thinking, I charged toward the truck, yelling, "Stop!" The tow truck driver eyed me in his rearview mirror, and without a word, he hit the brakes. I marched up to the truck, my voice low and seething. "Unhook it, now!" The driver raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You want it back? You'll have to pay the fee." I jabbed my finger toward my car. "I'm not paying a cent, and you're not towing my car anywhere. Unhook it now, or you'll be dealing with me." He scoffed, but he wasn't about to argue. The tow truck slowly backed up to my driveway, and with a loud clank, my Mustang was set back down onto the pavement. I stood there, chest heaving, glaring at the driver as he secured the truck for departure. "Next time, be more careful," he muttered before pulling away. Without wasting another second, I marched straight toward Karen's house. I could feel my blood boiling, but I wasn't about to let her have the satisfaction of seeing me falter. I banged on her door. She opened it with that same condescending smile, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "What is wrong with you?" I snapped. "You're a tyrant, Karen. What is it that makes you think you have any right to make my life a living hell?" She raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "I'm just trying to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. You've got to understand, Daniel. The rules exist for a reason." "No," I cut her off, stepping closer. "The rules exist because you're bored and power-hungry. Mind your own business. You've crossed a line this time." Her gaze flickered to the side, but she quickly regained composure. "If you want things to stay peaceful around here, maybe you should follow the rules. Or maybe you should leave everyone else alone and let us live our lives. I don't answer to you, Karen." I took a step back, my voice icy. "I'm done with this." I turned away, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me fume any longer. But as I walked down the path, my mind was racing. I wasn't about to let this go, not after everything she'd done. But a few days later, the worst thing happened. I woke up to the sound of a roaring engine. At first, I thought I was dreaming, my mind still foggy from sleep. But as the noise grew louder, I jolted awake, my heart hammering in my chest. I shot out of bed and rushed to the window, barely able to process what I was seeing. My Mustang was moving. The engine roared as it accelerated down the street, the unmistakable rumble of the old car's V8 echoing in my ears. My stomach dropped. "No, no, no!" I turned quickly, my pulse racing, desperate to get to the door and stop it. But then I froze. I reached for my pockets. Nothing. The cold weight of reality hit me like a sledgehammer. Where were my car keys? I checked my jeans, my jacket, the dresser, the nightstand. Panic slowly twisted inside me. They were gone. I thought back to the night before. Had I left them out? No, I always kept them on the counter next to the door. But there was no trace of them. I ran my hands through my hair in frustration. Had someone taken them? I dashed down the stairs, my heart pounding in my throat, my mind racing. No one could start the car without the keys. I always locked it up, always kept them on me, or at least in a place where I knew they'd be safe. But now? My car was gone, and I was standing there helpless, with nothing but an overwhelming sense of confusion. It couldn't have been stolen, not like this. I would have heard something, seen something. But my Mustang was gone, and without the keys, it was impossible to drive away. Unless someone had figured out how to get the keys without me knowing. I rushed to the window and peered out again, trying to make sense of what was happening. I couldn't see anything. My Mustang was long gone. There was only one thing left to do. I turned and bolted for the garage, my mind a whirl of confusion and rage. I needed to figure out who had done this, and I wasn't going to sit around doing nothing. I grabbed the keys to my second car, a battered but reliable old sedan, and slammed the garage door open. The engine roared to life as I twisted the key in the ignition, the familiar hum of the car grounding me for a moment. I pulled out of the driveway, my eyes scanning the street for any sign of my Mustang. The neighborhood was still quiet, save for the faint noise of birds and the occasional rustle of trees. But something wasn't right. I could see the tracks in the dirt, faint but visible in the early morning light. The tires had left a trail on the road, a sloppy, jagged path that was far from the smooth, controlled motion of someone who knew what they were doing. The person who had taken my Mustang had no idea how to drive it. The tracks veered off the street, then swerved back in, curving in ways that clearly showed they were inexperienced. Whoever had taken my car had struggled to handle it. I felt a strange sense of vindication. Whoever had stolen my car hadn't done it smoothly. They'd messed up. They had made a mistake. I followed the trail, driving carefully but with purpose, my eyes narrowed in on every twist and turn. The car had clearly gone this way. There was no mistaking it. A part of me couldn't help but smirk, even in the midst of everything. Whoever had taken my car was a terrible driver. It was like they had never been behind the wheel of a muscle car before. The trail led me through the neighborhood, winding around familiar streets. The further I went, the more the track seemed to take reckless turns, sharp angles, overcorrecting, then straying off course again. It was clear now. Whoever had taken my car had no clue what they were doing. I felt a surge of determination rise in my chest. They were leaving a trail, and I was going to follow it to the end. I couldn't be sure if it was Karen or someone she had involved, but I was getting closer. I would find my car, and I would make sure she paid for this. I was focused, my eyes scanning the road for any sign of my Mustang as I followed the erratic trail left behind by the tires. The road bent in odd directions, the tracks telling the story of someone who clearly had no business behind the wheel of my car. But just as I thought I was getting closer, something caught my attention. The sound of the engine roaring. It started low but quickly escalated, the unmistakable rumble of my Mustang tearing through the air closer than ever. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. Before I could even react, the sound became deafening. The car shot around the corner, swerving wildly as the tires screeched, clearly out of control. The Mustang barreled forward with no sign of slowing down, heading straight for the corner of a house. My eyes widened. No, this couldn't be happening. I watched in horror as the Mustang hit the side of the house with a sickening, bone-rattling crash. The impact sent a shockwave through the street, sending bricks and chunks of the front wall flying in every direction. The sound of the collision was so loud, I felt it in my chest. My stomach turned as the Mustang came to an abrupt halt, its engine sputtering and dying. I slammed my brakes and jumped out of my car, barely processing what had just happened. People were already pouring out of the house next door, panicked voices shouting over each other. "Oh my God! What happened? That's my house! My house! What the hell did you do? Someone call 911! This is life-threatening! You could have killed someone!" The cries of panic and confusion filled the air, voices shaking with fear and disbelief. I could hear the terror in their voices as they rushed toward the wreckage, their feet pounding the pavement. A woman screamed, looking at the massive hole in the side of her house, parts of the roof hanging loosely above her. "It's completely destroyed!" a man shouted, his voice trembling. "You could have killed us! Do you have any idea what just happened?" He was shaking, pointing at the wreckage. "My family was in there. We were sleeping." Others were yelling, some scrambling for their phones to call for help, some staring at the destroyed house, wide-eyed and stunned. The woman, now sitting in a daze against the wrecked Mustang, blinked up at the crowd. Karen. She didn't move, didn't respond to anyone's frantic calls. I could see her, her hair matted, her clothes torn. She had no idea what to do, the shock clear on her face. I shoved through the crowd, my anger boiling over. I stepped right up to her, standing above her with my fists clenched. "Karen!" I shouted, my voice filled with fury. "What the hell is wrong with you? You stole my car and now you're wrecking homes? What were you thinking?" Karen blinked up at me, still in shock, but the words didn't come. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but couldn't form the words. "You almost killed us!" a voice screamed from behind. I turned to see a man in a bathrobe, pointing at the gaping hole in the side of his house. "Do you have any idea what could have happened? My kids were in there. You could have killed them." I looked back at Karen, seeing the terror on her face now. Her eyes were wide, and she was still trying to process the mess she'd caused. The neighbors were right. She had endangered lives. They were absolutely right to be panicking. "You've ruined everything," I muttered, stepping back, but my voice was still filled with disbelief. This is beyond anything I thought you'd do, Karen." As the crowd continued to shout and point, the sirens of emergency vehicles finally cut through the noise, the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the chaos. The wailing of sirens grew louder as the flashing red and blue lights painted the street in an eerie glow. The crowd had only grown larger, people still shouting, some on their phones, others pacing in disbelief. The Mustang, still half destroyed and stuck in the side of the house, was the center of attention. I could hear the frantic voices of the neighbors, still in shock, as they shouted about the potential danger they'd been in. Within moments, 2 police cars arrived, skidding to a stop with their lights blaring. Officers jumped out, immediately taking in the wreckage with wide eyes. One officer approached the neighbors, asking questions while the other scanned the scene, his eyes landing on Karen, who was still sitting in the yard, dazed, her face pale and her hands shaking. "Who was driving this car?" one of the officers asked, his voice firm but calm as he approached Karen. Karen blinked, still in a daze. She opened her mouth but couldn't seem to speak. I took a step forward, my own frustration rising. The situation was growing more absurd by the second. "She was driving," I said, pointing at her. "She took my car, caused all this damage, and now she's sitting there like nothing happened." The officer nodded, taking out his notebook. "All right, ma'am. We're going to need to check some things. Can you provide your driver's license and registration for the vehicle?" Karen swallowed hard and reached into her purse, her hands trembling. The officer waited, but after a moment she pulled her hand back, a confused look crossing her face. I don't have it," Karen stammered, her voice shaking now as the panic started setting in. I don't have my driver's license." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" I don't have a license," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never got one." The words hit like a slap to the face. The officer looked at her in disbelief, then turned to his partner, muttering something under his breath. It was clear now that the situation was far worse for her than she could have imagined. "You're telling me you were driving this vehicle without a license?" the officer asked, his voice steady but with an edge of incredulity. Karen's eyes darted around, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't think it would be a problem." The officer took a deep breath, his hand now resting on his radio. "You've got a lot of explaining to do, ma'am. Not only have you destroyed property, but you've committed a serious offense by operating a vehicle without a license. You could be facing charges beyond just the damages here." The words sunk in like a stone. The people around us were starting to murmur, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The reality of the situation hit Karen all at once. She hadn't just stolen my car. She hadn't just wrecked it. She had been driving illegally this whole time. "Ma'am, we're going to need to take you in for questioning. You're under arrest," the officer said firmly, pulling out his handcuffs. Karen's face went white, her whole body trembling as she realized the depth of the mess she had created. She didn't fight as they cuffed her, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. The neighbors, who had once been screaming at her, now stood back, watching in a mix of disbelief and silent satisfaction as Karen was led away. As the officers took Karen to their patrol car, I stood frozen, still in shock at the turn of events. The Mustang was totaled, my neighbors were shaken, and Karen was now facing much more than just a simple car theft charge, and I realized this wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. This was criminal. She had gone too far, and she was going to have to answer for it. The officers began taking statements from the neighbors, while others started securing the scene. It was clear that the wreckage of both the house and my Mustang would take a lot to repair, but for now, the worst had been revealed. Karen wasn't just a nuisance in the neighborhood. She was a criminal, and this time, there was no getting out of it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, paperwork, and countless conversations with lawyers and insurance agents. The neighborhood was still reeling from the chaos that Karen had caused, but the worst was over. The truth was out, and Karen was finally facing the consequences of her actions. Karen's arrest set the stage for a long and drawn-out process. Initially, she tried to plead her case, claiming she had been under stress, that she didn't know what she was doing, but the evidence was undeniable. The wreckage of the house, the stolen car, the lack of a driver's license, it was all there, and it painted a clear picture of recklessness and irresponsibility. After a series of hearings, Karen was convicted on multiple charges: driving without a license, grand theft auto, reckless driving, and property damage. Her defense was weak, and the judge made it clear that her actions had endangered lives, both hers and the unsuspecting homeowners. The sentencing came a few months later, and Karen was handed a 2-year sentence in a local correctional facility. While the sentence wasn't as severe as some might have expected, the conditions of her probation were strict. She was ordered to pay full restitution for the damages to the house, which came to a hefty sum, and to compensate for the damages to my Mustang. Karen's financial situation had been tight, and it became clear she would have to sell her house and liquidate almost everything she owned to pay for the restitution. She had no choice but to accept the terms. There was no escaping the consequences. I, on the other hand, received compensation for the Mustang from my insurance, though the emotional cost of losing the car lingered. The vehicle was a part of me, a legacy from my father, and no amount of money could truly replace it. Still, I was glad it was over. The homeowners whose house had been destroyed were granted full compensation, and the insurance company moved quickly to repair the property. The damage had been extensive, but the family was able to return to their home after a few months of renovations. As for me, I moved on. I eventually found a new car, one that wasn't quite the same, but it was mine, and that was what mattered. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though it would never quite forget the chaos that Karen had caused. But in the end, justice had been served. Karen had paid for the damage she caused, and I had the peace of knowing she would never have the same power over my life again. Thank you for watching. Please like and comment if you enjoyed the story. Your feedback is a great support for us, and it means a lot.